I love animated children's films. From Disney to Datney, WALL-E to the Lego Movie, Minions is bad. It's a great time to watch these kinds of movies, with every year having at least one or two great films for both children and adults to enjoy. Some are hits, some are misses, and others nobody went to see. And yet there's this weird trend that keeps coming back to haunt us and doesn't appear to be going anytime soon, where studios, like Disney in particular, try to replicate their previous successes by replicating them almost verbatim, some of which aren't even 10 years old and have only just started taking the bus to school without parental supervision. But oh well, I guess The Rock needs money so he can afford to feed that massive ego of his with a small loan of $1 million. And now we have DreamWorks adding to this exhausting trend with a live-action remake of the widely successful How to Train Your Dragon series, which, looking at its latest trailer, looks like a shot-for-shot, word-for-word remake of a 15-year-old film, the same age as Hiccup in his first movie, which feels intentional but doesn't necessarily make it a good thing. Like, call me crazy, but there's already a really good film that you could watch instead of this one. It's called How to Train Your Dragon. What I find more annoying than anything is that there was another source material that the filmmakers of this remake could have taken inspiration from. It was called How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. However, there is one teeny tiny problem that would make this decision a lot harder to execute, especially to the modern audience. The books are nothing like the films and would be considered a huge departure for fans of the series. As someone who has read some of these books myself, I know. Look at me, I'm literate. I honestly think this would have been a more interesting approach and could even breathe new life into the franchise. And yes, I did just pull the "I've read the books first" excuse, which means I'm most certainly right. There are many interesting differences in the books that could have been explored in the new movie, as the other three barely touch upon them, like Hiccup learning to become a pirate in search for lost treasure, or him escaping the Roman Empire in a hot air balloon with the daughter of a woman named Big Boobied Bertha, or even a sequence of him sledging on a dinner tray over a frozen sea that's trapped a sea dragon called the Doomfang. Even the film's initial premise is almost entirely the opposite of the books. Dragons aren't hunted, but are instead integrated into society, which isn't exclusive to Hiccup's tribe, the Hairy Hooligans. And I remember my excitement when I saw the poster of the first film, followed by my sheer disappointment when I saw the trailer a few months later. My first thought came from this scene in particular.
Astrid, Toothless.
To which 10-year-old me said,
No, it's not!
Toothless in the books is about the size of a toaster and he can also talk, which if you've listened to the audiobooks, sounds a lot like David Tennant.
Toothless, hungry, feed me! He tugged at Hiccup's trousers.
Not only can he talk, but so can all of the other dragons. And what annoyed me even more was that the film included a species of dragon that looks way more like the Toothless described in the books. And yet here we get the coolest and rarest dragon who just so happens to be able to control all dragons. What makes this even funnier is that it is later revealed in the books that Toothless is actually a rare breed of dragon called the Sea Dragonus Giganticus Maximus.
Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north.
It's almost as if the author intended for Toothless to be more than meets the eye, and I thought the whole point of him being initially seen as the most harmless dragon was to reflect on how Hiccup was perceived by the rest of his tribe, which is a recurring theme throughout a majority of the books. Later on, Hiccup even gets a second dragon that he can ride called Windwalker. Windwalking in the air! There's just a lot more build up between each book, allowing for most of the characters to develop in front of the audience. For instance, each book builds Hiccup towards this legendary Viking status that we're told he becomes by him, each giving him different obstacles to overcome that would typically be resolved by being brave, and yet he bests them by being smart. He's rarely listened to by everyone else, including his dad, and that's what makes him a great unlikely hero. And in the first film, I'd say he's represented pretty well in this regard, and he even looks the part. And then we get onto the sequels and oh no, he's hot! We no longer get the outcast Hiccup, but instead this beautiful badass who invents a wingsuit and a flaming sword that other tribes fear when they even hear his name. And whilst there is some conflict between him and the elders of his tribe in the second film, he still has the respect of the younger members. Snotlout in the books wouldn't dare listen to Hiccup because he's essentially the series' Flash Thompson, who hates Hiccup for being the rightful heir to their tribe as he strongly believes he's more suited for the role. And then he redeems himself by sacrificing his life to save him. The person in the books who mainly listens to Hiccup is his best friend. And no, it is not Toothless, it's Fish Legs. And look at how they massacred my boy!
All around me are familiar faces.
As for Astrid, who the f*** is Astrid? She doesn't exist in the books, and the closest thing we get to her is Big Boobied Bertha's daughter, Kamikaze. Which brings me to Stoic. He is good. His low intelligence is brought out a lot more in the books, and the films don't really prioritize that, which is fine, it could be a lot worse. And he starts off as a picture-perfect recreation of the character in the first film by being kinda hot-headed, stuck in his old ways of being a true Viking, perfectly contrasted with Hiccup not being any of those things, and above all, being incredibly brave. Heck, maybe even stoic, am I right? And then in the second film, I'm not pausing for effect, I'm just waiting for people who haven't seen the movie to skip ahead by about 10-15 seconds. He's dead! He's gone! Kaput! His whole character arc is done. We don't see him again, apart from a few flashbacks in the third film. And yet in the books, he's around till the very end. And his journey of accepting his son for who he is isn't essentially condensed to just one film. But let me calm down for a second, as this film is part of a much larger discussion when it comes to adapting children's books. This film isn't even the only one to do it, almost all of them do. So let's flip the script a little. Well, now I can't read it. Looking at these films from the perspective of being films, there are a lot of challenges that would have been hard to translate onto the big screen. Sure, I'm upset that Toothless isn't a large talking rodent, but then again, would that have been interesting for a bunch of children watching for around 100 minutes? Sure, there'd be plenty of opportunities for some goofy comedy and wacky hijinks, but then what would the obstacles be for them to overcome that would be possible for Hiccup to do with this tiny little thing that doesn't do anything you ask no matter how much you try? When the first film came out, there were already 8 books released in the series that would have been almost impossible to condense into just one movie. And watching these films as an adult, without the burning resentment of them not being faithful to a bunch of books that I read and listened to when I was younger, they slap! They're really good! Yeah, I know I've just been dunking on these films like my name is Dunkachino.
What's my name?
Dunkachino!
But credit where it's due, I still really like these films. The first film was adapted by 3 dudes, William Davies, Chris Sanders, and Dean DeBlois, the latter 2 being also the film's directors, with the later entries being written and directed by just one of them. And even without 2/3 of the original writing team, the writing is fun and consistently good throughout all 3 films. The casting for the most part is great, the animation is gorgeous, and the score by John Powell is just incredible. So should it really matter that these films make these large departures from the source material they're adapting from? Well, yes and no. I guess it depends on how big these departures are and how popular these books are in the first place. Like, imagine if the first Twilight film was actually about a vampire hunter called Bella Pigeon who does not fall in love with 100-year-old vampire because she's worried about age gap discourse. It sounds fun on paper, but imagine the riots that would have broken out from all of its dedicated fans. And this isn't to say that these books weren't popular, they certainly were over here in the UK, but almost everyone and their dog knew what Twilight was before the films even came out. So for the first How to Train Your Dragon movie, making these changes wouldn't have been that controversial, as most people would have seen it and gone, "Oh wow, what an original idea, I've never seen this before!" The original author of the books, Cressida Cowell, even praises the films on her own website for being faithful to the spirit of the books. And since the film's release, the sales of her original works has only gone up. And having rewatched these films recently, yeah, she's got a point. The heart behind these films, where people and these mythical beings coexist, is incredibly faithful, even if it barely does anything else from the books. Despite the film Hiccup being a competent fighter, hot, and essentially the leader of the tribe in the later films, his core values and morals remain pretty much the same to his book counterpart. So these changes can be embraced as long as they still capture the heart and soul of the books, especially when some of its material is either extensive or simply unadaptable for a highly visual medium. DreamWorks, funnily enough, appears to be the best at doing this, with a certain degree of understanding of the things that make these books loved by so many people. I haven't read The Wild Robot by Peter Brown, but now I want to, really badly, because I really enjoyed crying my eyes out over a goose. And Captain Underpants by Dav Pilkey, which I have read, does an incredible job of capturing the humour from the original, and honestly felt like the perfect book to adapt, as most of its comedy is visual. It made me so happy to see Flipperama incorporated into the climax, and also reassured me to think that the artists had about a minute less content to animate. But there is one book that they've adapted which they make a large amount of changes to, whilst trying to maintain its initial tone, and in the process developing a whole new layer of meaning and a heartfelt message. And on every rewatch, I forget was based on a 26-page long picture book. Yep, you guessed it. It's Shrek time, baby. Give it up for Shrek, everyone. Yeah, Shrek. Oh, yeah, Shrek, baby. Oh,
Enough, Reggie.
I appreciate this is my second video I've released this year where I bring up Shrek, but I promise you, I'm not going to make this a habit. Because the first step is admitting you have a problem. Shrek by William Steig was published in 1990, and was about an ogre who gets kicked out of his parents' house because he's 25 years old and needs to learn about being independent. Where he meets a witch who tells him his fortune about him meeting a princess as ugly as him, but before he can get to her, he encounters a dragon in the woods, has a weird nightmare about being touched by children, rides a donkey, defeats a knight by using his signature fire breath, and ends up in a hall of mirrors. The donkey is only around for about 3 pages and mainly talks about how much he likes the green. So there are quite a few differences between this book and the film. I'd say the most faithful part is Shrek's objective, as he does in fact go on a quest to save a princess with the help of a donkey. Except in the film's case, the princess is Cameron Diaz, and he's only doing it for a f***wad who seems to have deported everyone into his back garden. This film was adapted for the screen by 4 dudes. Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, Joe Stillman, and Roger Schulman, with Andrew Adamson and Vicky Jensen directing. And tonally, the film captures the immature humour surrounding Shrek's impulsiveness fairly well, perfectly visualised in its opening sequence. Although, it is a shame that we didn't get to see Shrek use his signature laser eyes, or cause plants and trees to recoil at the smell of his BO. But the most interesting part is in the last few pages before he meets the princess, where he stumbles into the Hall of Mirrors and is initially frightened by his own reflections, panicked and confused by these hideous creatures that surround him, only to realise they are him, thus emboldening him to accept himself for who he is. What I love about this is how the first film works with this theme of self-acceptance and communicates it by further developing the princess, in this case Fiona. She learns to accept him, allowing him to do the same for himself, despite being convinced no one could ever love him. Plus Eddie Murphy's there. Then on to the second film, with a mostly different writing and directing team to the first, this idea is taken even further, with him altering his appearance for her and her parents' approval.
To this handsome honka,
just for her to tell him that's not the ogre she fell in love with. The inclusion of Shrek and the princess's relationship being explored in a lot more depth, I would argue, communicates these themes pretty effectively, as the book only has her in it for 3 pages, where they meet, they kiss, and they're married. Again with this medium, it's hard to represent these internalized character moments without the use of a voiceover, because then it would undermine the audience's intelligence and simply just look lazy. Imagine the film having a voiceover. Shrek may as well be saying, "Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation." So whilst there are valid criticisms about this film's departure from the books in order to appeal to a wider audience, it still feels like it explores these similar concepts without completely changing the context of what came before. William Steig even went on to say this about the film, drawing attention to its vulgarity and repulsiveness. And I mean, yeah, I think animating this scene in a children's film is definitely one of those things.
That's a penis!
And again, there are only so many pages of material you could work with some having the potential to not translate very well in a visual medium, even if that medium is animation. Like, imagine if they tried adding this to the movie. Officer, get him! And there are other children's literature that's adapted into films that run into this same issue. Take The Cat and the Hat by Dr. Seuss, for example. With just over 60 pages, most of which being taken up by illustrations, and centers around two kids getting visited by a cat on a rainy day, who sets it upon himself to make sure that they have fun in spite of it all. And with the film, also adapted by DreamWorks, but in this case their live-action division, who are known for their many gems like Transformers, Dreamgirls, and Gladiator, already had a big challenge of translating this weird and wonderful book into a full-length feature. Their solution was to not utilize their established award-winning animation studio, but instead to do what their parent company did with The Grinch again, but this time with Mike Myers. That's the only time I'm ever going to get a spot on Villager impression, what the fuck? For The Grinch, I think this made sense, because most kids, myself included, would have known who Jim Carrey was from The Mask when it played at Christmas on the TV. Children who didn't have IMDb at the time, so basically all of them, wouldn't have known who Mike Myers was, and would have had to have been Sherlock fucking Holmes to realise that he did in fact voice Shrek. I didn't know that he voiced Shrek until years later when watching Austin Powers I suddenly went, hang on a minute, this guy sounds like Shrek! So okay, live action, anthropomorphic cat, that'll be fine. I'm sure it won't raise any weird questions like, where did he come from? What's in the box? Or why is the fish talking? Because Dr. Seuss definitely intended for his creations to be based in a world that is very similar to our own, and not to utilize this strange concept called escapism. Ah well. At least Universal have learned that. What the fuck? So how does it work with Dr. Seuss's writing style, which mostly consists of rhyming couplets? Well, there's a musical number where the cat sings his lines from the book and does drag, but with 0 death drops, so shit drag.
I'm so into voguing right now.
And a narrator who also reads from the book, only for it to turn out to be just the cat again. Usually this is the part of the video where I would name the people who worked on this film, but I honestly think I'd be doing them a favor if I didn't. And there's so much more that they add to the film for more context, which in theory isn't a bad thing, but it is in its execution. Nobody was wondering what their mum was up to and how she was struggling as a single parent, nor did the kids have any flaws that they needed to overcome, because they were meant to be all of us reading the book, because we obviously don't have any flaws.
Wrong.
These are potentially good ideas, but they only appear in the film as padding to draw out the runtime, and they never go anywhere. It makes a huge point about how shitty their mum's boss is, and yet she's still working for him by the end. Plus Conrad and Sally go through their entire character arcs in just one scene, and then it adds even more completely new material that just feels out of place, where the Cat in the Hat runs a Great British Bake Off but without the BBC, sends Thing 1 and Thing 2 to impersonate police officers so they can harass their mum, which is kind of pointless because they could have just called the police. And then a climax where the kids are sent into a parallel universe where the Cat in the Hat is from. What the fuck? What page of the book suggests this? He just walks in? Honestly, I'd rather see Illumination do a remake of this instead of The Grinch, because at least this makes sense as an animated children's film, and does not require there to be super witty dialogue for adults to enjoy or a coherent plot, which is what they do best. So, okay, this film is really weird. And the book is weird too, just not in the way that your dad makes bad jokes at a family gathering. But did it capture the spirit of the books in the same way that How to Train Your Dragon and Shrek did? Not really. It doesn't really give children this sense of whimsy and charm, but instead more,
Hello, police. A man in a catsuit has broken into my house and he's tied up the nanny.
okay, now I'm angry again. And I don't want this video to be any longer than my last one, so let's finish on a more positive example that takes a well-known book that a lot of people have read, keeps its core premise, whilst also changing and adding characters, and entirely new scenes that almost completely change the original's ending. And despite all of this, everyone loves it.
I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds illegal.
Baby's first Wes Anderson film, or more appropriately titled Fantastic Mr. Fox, was based on the book by Roald Dahl, Fantastic Mr. Fox, which centered around a Fox, and the three farmers that have a vendetta against him after he keeps stealing from his land. It was adapted for the screen by Wes himself and Noah Baumbach, Greta Gerwig's husband, which if you've seen either of their movies makes you wonder, what on earth would conversations be like at their Christmas dinner?
I just feel like...
Every day I wake up!
These two chill dudes take this concept and end up making one of the best animated children's films of all time. They keep the story beats the same, draw inspiration from lines from the book, and add more depth to certain characters by removing some others. For instance, he only has one child in the film, whereas in the book he has 4. Then there's the addition of several characters that never appear. Christopherson, Kylie, and Owen Wilson are the most notable of these. Plus Petey. Shout out to Petey, he's an absolute king. And yet these changes help the narrative rather than distracting from it. Mrs. Fox in the books is completely complicit with Mr. Fox going out to steal from the 3 farmers, while the movie Mrs. Fox is completely aware of the dangers they raise, which causes a rift to appear in their relationship as well as their marriage. Yeah, Noah definitely wrote this bit, as this appears to be a recurring theme in a majority of the films he writes for, except for Barbie. With Mr. Fox's children being just one child, it feels more personal, where Ash is frustrated by how little his father pays attention to him, contrasted with how incredible his cousin is at pretty much everything.
Hey, look at him dead!
Then with Kylie, it allows for Mr. Fox to effectively communicate what's going on in his head most of the time, where we watch how he plans to steal from the 3 farmers, helping us understand more of how he's able to do it unnoticed, and showing to the audience his cleverness, as well as making for some really fun heist sequences. The 3 farmers in question, Bogus, Bunce and Bean, are brought to life incredibly well in this film. Even if the former 2 are way less vocal and free-thinking than in the book, it allows for Bean to be developed more as a formidable foe against Mr. Fox. Plus I'm sure Bogus and Bunce would have been a lot more vocal if Bean let them actually talk.
Nathan, all's well? Wonderful.
These characters are picture-perfect recreations of the ones in the book, and I would argue are the most faithful in contrast to the rest. There are even lines from the book used to describe them that are almost identical in the film, perfectly narrated by Bill Murray's Badger. And not only that, but there's also the nursery rhyme from the first page of the book that's incorporated into the film's score by Alexandre Desplat, which has no right to be as good as it is. Imagine if this was made by the same team that did Cat in the Hat. Mike Myers would probably start rapping whilst appropriating several other cultures in the process. Heck, even if Tim Burton directed, he probably would have made something even creepier than what he did with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, with Danny Elfman treating the nursery rhyme as some sort of demonic incantation as he did with the score of that movie. Danny, what were you doing here? Rightfully so. This film is untouchable. There is no reason for it to be made again. Everyone involved brought their A game, and it shows. Perfectly ending the film with the feast scene from the book, and Mr. Fox's rousing speech where, hang on, why is it saying there's 34 minutes left?
Cider.
Oh yeah, remember how I said it changed the ending? Yeah, so the film keeps going, where we have a fight between Rat Mr. and Mrs. Fox, resulting in him being killed, a battle in the town centre, a rescue mission which completes Ash and Christopherson's character arcs, Mr. Fox getting what's left of his tail back, and a scene with a wolf that is both visually and thematically breathtaking. And even though the resolution is pretty much the same from the book, it feels way more earned this way, especially within the context of a movie, as Mr. Fox has learnt more about himself and grown, making Mrs. Fox's final line hit all the more effectively.
You really are kind of a quote-unquote fantastic fox.
Say that again?
For any aspiring filmmakers that want to make an adaptation of a children's book in the future, this is the blueprint. Have a nice day. You can make a faithful adaptation and a good movie. The difficulty is putting together a team of people who understand the source material, at least to a certain degree. Is it any wonder that this wasn't the only Roald Dahl story that Wes Anderson would go on to adapt? And yet, the industry has been getting away with taking creative liberties on so many written stories for years. Disney's first ever feature film was based on a book written by 2 German dudes called Jacob and Wilhelm, which despite its commercial success was not immune to criticisms of diluting the original story to cater to a wider audience. And then they did the same thing again and again and again, only to stop for a moment, realize how much more money they could be making by putting in less effort, and then go back and do it again. But it's not just them. As far as I know, Paddington never went to prison, and Tintin was never Nathan Drake, or Willy Wonka was never a twink. Did that stop the filmmakers from staying true to their characters? No. And that's the best we've got right now. We might not be able to get a fantastic Mr. Fox as often as we'd hope, but we can at least settle for the alternative. And it could be worse. We haven't had a Cat in the Hat level disaster in quite some time, and I hope it stays that way. Let's just hope that the new How to Train Your Dragon still feels as fresh as the original. But either way, it's still going to do very well at the box office, because despite me hating remakes and everything that they stand for, most people don't. I'm probably going to end up watching it anyway. I mean, the VFX looks great, and there's a great opportunity to do something a little more darker and grittier than the original. But in doing so, let's not forget the true original. This story wouldn't exist without Cressida Cowell's books. Shrek wouldn't exist without William Steig's. These books should not be forgotten, nor do they need to be improved upon when they're taken to the big screen. All I'm trying to say is that they should be embraced. It can be big, it can be small, but either way, it will always be appreciated. Also, that new Shrek design looks like ass and it makes me want to commit arson. Hello, Future TJ here. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who subscribed to my channel from my last video, and yeah, I'm really glad to have you, and I hope you stick around. I appreciate that my last video gave more of the impression that I talk about video games. Don't worry, I still do plan to talk about video games, but anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you haven't already, please check out my friend Adam's channel. He recently just did a 25-minute video on Fight Night, which I highly recommend, and he's very good. So yeah, thank you guys so much again, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye bye!